I just love the view. I love looking at the sea, and it's such a beautiful day with the wind. It's really, really lovely.
She was a girl with a divided heart, like the light and the dark, a divided heart, between two continents and somewhere far home, but where it really lay was deep within her soul. But where it really lay was deep within her soul.
Hello, I'm Micki Pistorius, and welcome to Micki Pistorius Profile Around Record, the second episode. You've just watched the second episode of Catch Me a Killer, the television series, which is based on my autobiography, Catch Me a Killer. So, just to recap, in the previous episode, we saw the detectives finding the last victim of the Station Strangler and the crowd, and there was riots. So, the body was taken to the mortuary, and then the detectives had the very difficult task of trying to identify who this child was, and they had to go to all the missing children reports. I would like to congratulate the director of these two episodes, Tracy Larkin, for the poignant sensitivity that she captured in the scene where the mother is overwhelmed with anguish at finding the body of her little boy that was murdered. And I would also like to congratulate Charlotte Hope, who plays Micki, because in the sensitivity that she portrayed when she spoke to one of the little boys and to draw up the identity kit. So that struck me. That was quite nice. So just before the detectives could find the name of this missing child, there was a stroke of luck, and this was this woman called Fosia Hercules. Now this is an example of what I often say, good women and good men making a difference. And she called us, and she told us that she had noticed a man walking with two children. And the reason that she noticed him was because the two children were the boys' grandson of a friend of hers, and one of the boys was missing. So she took us to this family where we met the other little boy, and then we found out we tried to take two boys, but the one didn't want to go. So now we had witness accounts of this. So then it was necessary to approach the little boy and to get him to draw an identity. But just before Micki and the detective enters to speak to the little boy, she's standing outside and they're smoking. The detective in the series was also called AJ Oliver, played by Vaughn Lucas. Now AJ Oliver was a real life detective, and AJ became one of my greatest friends, lifelong friends. And in that scene, he's telling Micki how concerned he is about his own 10-year-old little boy, who was called Ben, but in real life it's called Kurt, and living in Mitchell's Plain, and he was really worried about that. And then he also asked Micki, how does she deal with all of this? And Micki said, from the darkness there is light. And if you listen to the lyrics in the intro of this Micki Pistorius Profile on Record, you will hear the song Girl with a Divided Heart, where she sings about light and darkness. And that is a song from my friend Helena Hetema. And please listen to her songs on Spotify. And thank you, Helena, for allowing us to use the lyrics of your song, which is very applicable to my life. I really appreciate that. So then there was another stroke of luck. We had a woman, and she was a nurse at the Kenilworth Clinic, and she called us, another good woman, and she told us that there was a man that booked himself into the Kenilworth Psychiatric Clinic, and by then we had released the ID kit, and we'd already released my profile in the press. And she said, this man fits the ID kit and my profile. Plus, he had a scrapbook of newspaper clippings of the Station Strangler with him. So the detectives followed up on that lead, and they had a name. The name was Norman Simons. And then they did their research, and then they came upon a photograph of Norman Simons, and he was wearing a suit. And I did actually say in my profile that he would be very neat and probably wear a suit. And coincidentally, that photograph was taken when Norman Simons went to the police, and he wanted to sign up as a police reservist to help them in the investigation of the Station Strangler. Now, this is not so uncommon, where serial killers try to insert themselves into the investigation to find out what we know about them. So we had a photograph of him. And the detectives started following up, and they started following this man. The episode begins with Norman Simons. He told the detectives that he was molested as a young boy by his older brother called Boise. Now, the psychology behind molestation like that is when somebody is being molested, they are the passive victim, the receiver. And then there is the active aggressor. So a way that the ego tries to deal with this trauma is for the victim to identify with the aggressor. And the psychology behind that, to put it simply, means if I am doing it to somebody else, that means I'm no longer the receiver victim. So if that makes sense. And also, if we look at what happened here, Norman Simons selected a boy, this last boy, in the same age group as he was when he was molested. And it was a school child, it wasn't a street child. So when he did to that little boy, and when he killed that little boy, psychologically he was committing suicide as a little boy, trying to get rid of that victim feeling. Which is no excuse for what he did. But on a psychological level, that explains what happened. So he told his the psychiatric people that this was the voice of his brother, Boise, in his head that told him to do these killings, but it was his hands, etc. But we'll get back to it a little bit later. So Simons had a fixation in the anal phase. So Freud's theory on the anal phase, which, as you remember, was between 2 to 4 years. So this is also called the potty training phase, and it's all about control. So at this stage, the child gains control over the sphincter gland in the anus. He's also, at 2 years old, learning to walk. So he's gaining control over his environment. The first steps of independent moving away from the mother figure. Okay. Plus, they start dressing themselves. We all know 2-year-old toddlers, I want to be it myself, etc. Everybody's okay. So that's control. It's very much a control phase. So what happens with the potty training is the little prince is sitting on the throne, which is the toilet. And the most important person in his life is his mother, or the caregiver, is literally on her haunches in front of him, sitting down and waiting for him. So he could either release feces and please her, or he could retain it and keep it back. So that is a lot of power to have over the most important person in your life. So there could be a fixation. Sadistic behavior is also all about control, and controlling the amount of pain that is administered to a person. So we will encounter this again in one of the later cases, so please stay tuned to our television series. As I also said, the anal phase is a phase of perfectionism. And there were quite a few indications in this investigation of perfectionism. The first one is when we published the bodies. Now, those children were killed from 1986. So when we published the names of the victims that were already found, we published them in a certain chronological order. And then the detectives discovered another body. And in his pocket, there was a note that said number 14, many more to score. So what that indicated is it irritated the killer that the boys were not in the right chronological order in which he killed them. They were in the order in which we found them. He was perfectionist, he didn't like that. So he left us a note. This one is number 14, and you have many more to find. But that also indicated is those vast dunes in Mitchell's Plain that he knew where every one of those bodies lay. So he had that knowledge. One of the other indications of perfectionism is one of the little boys that we found is his shirt was so neatly tucked into his pants, very neatly. And the pathologist report indicated that this boy had been sodomized, which means he was redressed. So that is what we call a sign of undoing on a crime scene, as if the killer wants to undo what has happened because he has guilt feelings about it. So Freud spoke about the conscience as the superego. So whenever I pick up signs of undoing on a crime scene, then I advise the detectives during the interrogation that there will be a brief window of opportunity where they can rely on an internal ally, the conscience of the killer, and get him to confess. So Simons was an ego-dystonic serial killer, which means he cannot identify or associate himself with the fact that he killed. He was a teacher. That didn't fit into his persona, that he killed the boys. So he would, afterwards, as soon as he got a lawyer, and he did, deny that he ever killed anyone, which is actually what happened. So that's ego-syntonic serial killers. Okay. So I just like to put this on record as well. Charlotte again gives a wonderful performance, but in reality, I was not present with the arrest. I was not present with the interrogation. I was not present with the house searches, etc. There's a bit of creative licensing there, but it's a very good series. So I could have, because I was in other cases. So I just want to put that record straight. And I would never visit him unaccompanied on the side. So the first time that I actually met him was at the Falkenberg clinic. I was in Pretoria and I flew in after the arrest, so I missed that. So we were at the Falkenberg clinic. And he was being psychiatrically evaluated by Dr. Tobias Zaber. So I was sitting in the car waiting because it was raining. And the next moment, the door opened and he got in. And it was a bit of a shock to me because for the first time I really came face to face this close to the man that had been in my head for so many months and I had been in his head for so many months. And the conversation with him was alarmingly normal. It was very ordinary. He told me that he liked classical music. He told me that he could speak French, so could I, a little bit. And he said he'd like to visit Denmark one day. And that was the first time how I met him. Looking into the eyes of this killer, such a normal man. He was a very educated and cultured man, very normal man. And then we'll see in the series as well the pointing out of the crime scenes. Now, we made a decision that Simons would point out the crime scenes after midnight for his own safety. So all procedures were followed. He was with an independent detective and they were pointing out the crime scenes. The rest of us were patrolling the streets of Mitchell's Plain, and it was quite eerie that night driving in Mitchell's Plain to make sure that nobody woke up, because if they knew what was going on they would have killed him. So we were patrolling in Mitchell's Plain. And then we got a call and it alerted us that he had pointed out another crime scene that we didn't know about. And he actually told that detective that he had dropped coins there before, and when he was on the crime scene, he picked up that coins. So he was definitely there. So one thing I just also say is within that window of opportunity of working with his own conscience, during that interrogation, he did make certain admissions to the detectives, even certain demonstrations. And now he was pointing out all the crime scenes. So we waited for them to leave, and then we went back to this crime scene, and we asked the fire brigade if they could help us with their lights, because it was very dark, and we couldn't find anything there except clothing. He never admitted to killing anybody there. So that was the point here. So next, it's going to follow the trial. So I remember picking up this was a year or so later, but I remember picking up the mothers of Mitchell's Plain, the mothers of the 21 other boys that were killed, so that they could have the opportunity to attend the trial. And I remember Mrs. Samari, and I remember Mrs. Caputo, and the rest of them just sitting there quietly, listening to the trial. And the state prosecutors, Mike Stowe and Annette Lange, made the decision that they were only going to charge him with the last murder. I remember the other boys were killed since 1986, because evidence was really, really scarce on the last cases. And with this case, they had the evidence and the testimony of Fojo Hercules and the other little boy. So they decided to get a good conviction and to get a life sentence, they're going to go with the one case. Which is good, but it also meant that the admissions and the demonstrations that it made to the detectives regarding other cases and the pointing out of the other crime scenes was inadmissible in court. However, Norman Simons was the suspect that the South African Police Service arrested in their investigation of the Station Strangler serial killer case. And he was convicted in the Supreme Court of South Africa, albeit of only one murder. I have no doubt. So, and no more similar killings with that precise modus operandi was committed in that vicinity ever again. Now, I also said I would tell you about the impact that this case can have years and years later. So 30 years later, looking at this case, many things happened. When CMAC was in the post-production stage of this television series, I advised them that they should go to A.J. Oliver, the detective, and that he could be the police liaison officer and he had first-hand knowledge about the case. So they met AJ and he was going to be the police liaison officer. And then it was COVID. And sadly, AJ and his wife Abby passed away during COVID. And I lost my friend. And by then, his son Kurt had grown up. And he was a big man. And he followed in his father's footsteps, and he became first a detective, and then he resigned, and then he studied to become a minister. So then he was a minister, and he founded a non-profit organization, and it's called Sons of Issachar. And Sons of Issachar would feed the people of Mitchell's Plain, and they have a program for drug rehabilitation and a mentorship program, etc. And Kirk was not in charge of that. And he got appointed as the production team's police liaison officer. And I remember in the pre-production phase, I was there in Cape Town, and I remember the first time I saw Kurt. The last time I saw him, he was a little boy. And now he was all grown up, and he's a big man. And he was standing there on the steps of the Mitchell's Plain police station. And I just walked up to him, and he wrapped me in his big bear hug. And my friendship that I had for his father was just transferred right onto him. And now he's one of my very best friends. And that to me was very, very great. And what I'm also grateful for is during the Christmas break, the actress Charlotte Hope and the producer Brett and Simon and the director Tracy Larkin did not go back to Britain. They stayed in Cape Town and they actually helped Kurt prepare food, Christmas lunches for the people of Mitchell's Plain. So if you could open your heart for his charity organization, I'd be grateful. And then also, during 2023, I was in Cape Town and I was invited to deliver a public lecture on serial killers, which I do. And this was arranged by Olivia Henley of Fruitcake Society. So whilst I was there, Olivia also donated all the proceeds of this public lecture and my fee to Kurt's Sons of Issachar organization. So whilst I was there in Cape Town and while I was lecturing, and I told the audience about the nurse in Kenilworth that had called us, there was a lady in the audience and she put up her hand and she said, "My name is Romy and I'm the nurse that called you." And I was astounded. After 30 years, I actually met this woman in person. It was just another circle that was closing. And I was so grateful, and we gave her a round of applause because she was an unsung hero. If she hadn't called us, it might have taken us so much longer to identify this man, and he could have killed more. So that was another circle that was wonderful. It was closed. And then during filming as well, they were filming a scene at the train station. And Kurt noticed this very distraught woman standing there, and she was almost hysterical. And he went up to her and he asked her what was wrong. And she said, "But it's the Station Strangler." And he explained to her, and he said, "No, we're shooting a television series." And here, I must compliment Chiaro Molinaro, our casting director, for casting Kagiso Capers in the role of Norman Simons, because he looks so much like Norman Simons that this woman had thought he was. And then the story came out. She was actually the sister of one of the other victims, and she saw the man leaving with her brother, and now she saw him and she thought he was out. And she told Kurt that the impact that the murder of her brother had on her family, that they completely disintegrated and they fell apart, and she's been a sex worker ever since, and she's destitute. So Kurt took her under his wing, and the Sons of Issachar is looking after her. In July 2023, after 27 years, the Department of Correctional Services decided to release Norman Simons on parole. The community was up in arms, old wounds were open, and scars were ripped open. The families of the victims were not consulted, and some people in the community still believed that the wrong man was arrested in the first place. I put it on record that I have no doubt that Norman Simons is the Station Strangler. And I concur with the FBI profiler John Douglas when he said, "Why give somebody a second chance at life when you could be giving an innocent person a first chance of dying?" Research shows that released serial killers kill again. It is in their nature. He should never have been released. None of them should ever be released. 30 years later, I realized it was a very long walk for the investigation team and for Norman Simons, and he might feel that his walk has finally ended in freedom. But the mothers of the 21 other children, like dear Mrs. Samai and Mrs. Capita and Mrs. Swartz and all the others, the journeys of their boys ended in ruins. One can only dream what their lives would have become, would have amounted to. The only solace that I can offer them is that their boys are truly free now. Perhaps they're riding their bicycles somewhere in a distant shore. Looking out over the ocean, I remember my own journey in that stage, and I still had to walk very far in the darkness before I reached the light. I did not realize then that there was an ocean of possibilities waiting for me. At the end of this episode 2, Micki's mentor, played by myself and Herod, tells her, "You understand them." Now, I've often been taken to task for the fact that I said I understand serial killers. And a little bit of informative focus, I would like to clear this up. It is Micki Pistorius profile on record. I am a psychologist, and I need to understand human behavior. If I do not understand human behavior, then I cannot explain it to people, and ultimately, I cannot explain it to a judge, because I'm also a profiler and I work with criminal behavior. So I don't mean it in the sense, if you have a friend that has done something unpleasant and you say, I can understand why you did it. It's not that. It is my job as a psychologist to understand behavior and to understand criminal behavior. A maths teacher cannot explain maths if she doesn't understand it herself. Albert Einstein said that if you cannot explain something simple, then you don't understand it yourself. So that is what I mean by I understand their behavior, because I need to explain it to people, educational value, and ultimately I need to explain it as an expert in court to the judge. So in psychology, we have a theory, and it's called theory of mind. In an article in the neurosciencenews.com, the researcher Roxana Markovic at the University of Birmingham explains that individuals with stronger mind-reading abilities have the capacity to understand other people's feelings and intentions, and they're much more successful in cooperative tasks. So this ability can be learned, and it will improve with time. All good psychologists have this ability to tune into the energy vibration of their clients, even when their clients are not present. It goes with the territory. So all of us have this ability to tune into energy. For example, if you visit friends of yours and they just had a fight before you arrived and you walk into their home, you will pick up that there is something going on. There is a different energy in a cathedral that there is in a cemetery. Now, just as athletes, just as we all can run, but athletes are better because they practice. My ability to pick up this energy has been practiced, and that's why I got good at it eventually. So there's nothing hocus pocus about it. I don't read minds and look into a criminal or look into criminal's mind through a crystal ball. It is my job, and I'm a professional psychologist. So I hope this clears up the sensationalism often in the press about the fact that she understands serial killers. I hope that makes sense. It's just a little bit of educational value for Micki Pistorius on profiling. So ending in this second episode, I really would like to compliment all the good acting of the actors. It's really fantastic. I'd like to compliment Shara Molinaro, the casting director. I'd like to compliment Warren Gray for the setting design. Dino Benedetti with his camera for capturing the moody atmosphere. Carly Seegers for the costumes, and she had quite fun dressing up the sex workers in one of the later episodes. Also for the police liaison, of course, my friend Kurt Oliver, the director of this series, Tracy Larkham, and the producers, Simon and Greg. So, in the next episode, episode 3 of Catch Me a Killer, the television episode, we will meet 2 more serial killers in that episode, but it also will have the educational value from you, and I will go through the definitions of serial killers and what differentiates a serial killer from a spree murderer or a mass murderer or even a robber. So as I said in the beginning, I hope you find my series, Micki Pistorius Profiler on Record, as informative, educational. I hope it's inspirational. And I will give you an authentic account, my personal experience, of what it is like to work with the minds of criminals. I will demystify serial killers without sensationalizing them. So I will see you next week after the 3rd episode of Catch Me a Killer, and the 3rd episode of Micki Pistorius Profiler on Record. If you like what we're doing, then please vote with your thumbs up, share it, and subscribe to the channel. See you next week.
She was a girl with a divided heart, like the light and the dark, a divided heart, between 2 continents and somewhere far home, but where it really lay was deep within her soul. But where it